Oh, great. It's great to be here. Great to be back in Hamilton. I just love this gathering. I'm passionate about community, and it just means so much to me to be with so many other people who are passionate. I've been on the road for a month. My voice is starting to give out. I've been, pretty tired, just flew in from Australia. But I really get re-energized by being in a room with so many other people who share my passion. I think now's our time to make change, and we need to take full advantage of it. I totally changed up my speech because John did such a great job about talking about neighborhoods and community, the power of community. Celeste, you knocked it out of the ballpark. That was fantastic. So what I really want to do now is really talk about how do we really challenge us about how do we make changes in our agencies to really be good partners with communities. I think that's what we really need to focus on. Beyond, sponsoring barbecues and fundamental change in the way we do our work. So that's what I want to focus on. I'll do a workshop later today about how do we get more people engaged in our communities, but I think right now I really want to focus on that piece. So I retitled it, Reorienting Agencies to Rebuild Communities. And what I want to emphasize is I think there's really two paths to creating great neighborhoods or healthy communities. And one of those paths is service delivery. Absolutely, we need services. But the other path is community building. They're two very different paths. With service delivery, it's done through agencies. Community building is done through associations. Service delivery, we have different classes of people. We got the professionals, we got the volunteers, we got the clients. In community, we're just all citizens. In service delivery, it tends to be top-down, whereas community building is democratic. Service delivery tends to be one way, whereas community is all about reciprocity, mutual support. Service delivery tends to be siloed, whereas community is holistic. It's where it all comes together. Service delivery tends to focus on people's needs, whereas community focuses on people's gifts. And service delivery is totally dependent on money. I know there's some passionate public servants here who show up at work regardless of whether you're getting paid, right? But most people get, pay is pretty important. And for community, it's all about trust and relationships. And I'm not valuing one over the other. Both are absolutely critical. They're two very different paths. The problem is, over time, we've had more and more and more services and less and less and less community. And I'm not one of those Tea Party guys from the United States. I don't think the answer is fewer services, less government. The answer is more community. But it's really tough to get both. And what worries me right now is that our community's been in an incredible state of crisis. John, in his fantastic speech yesterday, mentioned Robert Putnam. Robert Putnam wrote the most depressing book for those of us who care deeply about community. He tracks the incredible breakdown of community over the past 50 years. Talks about how fewer and fewer people, families are eating dinner together. Fewer and fewer people voting. Fewer and fewer people belonging to the traditional associations. Really depressing book. Lots of reasons for that. Single-purpose land use, where you used to live, learn, work, play, all in the same place. Now it creates single-purpose places, bedroom communities where we just go to sleep. We're losing some of our neighborhood centers. We're building these gigantic community centers where there's no community, where you have to drive a half hour to go do recreation. Right? We drive a half hour to the mall to shop, and we're losing our main streets. In a sense, we have many different communities, but in a sense, we have no community at all, because we don't bump into the same people over and over and over again. How people are increasingly mobile, more time working, fear. Celeste talked in many neighborhoods. Whether or not people have a reason to be afraid, they see the papers. And they're living behind closed doors. And the more they're behind closed doors, don't know their neighbors, the more fearful they become. Fear of the unknown. Electronic screens. Robert Putnam said the biggest thing breaking down in community is television. People say they don't have time for community, and they have to spend an average of 3 or 4 hours a day in front of the television set. Keep thinking, man, if television's our biggest competition and we're losing, come on, right? And now there's all kinds of other electronic screens that are taking up our time. Increasing globalization, decisions and products made further and further away from where we live. And the most troubling to me is that the very agencies, John referred to them as the institutions, that are trying to help our communities inadvertently contributed greatly to the breakdown of our communities. Where we have more and more and more professionals doing for communities what communities used to do better for themselves. And where the strength of every agency is organized into silos with a laser-like focus on their function, on their expertise, but it makes it absolutely impossible to work with communities. We've created one silo for old people. We get another silo for young people. We get another one for people with disabilities. We get another one for new immigrants. Everybody's in their own silos, and you can't build community in silos. It's a question of who's serving whom. When our communities are having to organize themselves the way the professionals are organized, rather than the professionals organized the way our communities are organized. Totally backwards. Whew. The good news is there's lots of opportunity for change. I was recently in Taiwan and was reminded that the word for crisis is made up of two characters. One meaning danger and the other meaning opportunity. So great opportunity these days. Good news. Of course, the other side has got incredible crises we're facing. Not only the crisis of our community, but the crisis of our democracy. I think this is a huge crisis. Everywhere I go in the world, fewer and fewer people are voting, except in Australia where they still require it, right? And even in Australia, people think of themselves as ratepayers rather than as citizens. I do work in Beijing. Beijing has ratepayers. How are we different? We're starting to recognize we need to bring back our democracy, that it's in incredible danger. And so I think we're starting to recognize that we need to do more than customer service. When I first came to city government in Seattle in 1987, Ted Gabler just written his book called Reinventing Government. And it was all about reinventing government to be more like a business. And we use business terminology all the time. We talk about our business plans. We call our general manager the CEO. We have benchmarks. And we emphasize customer service. And it's important. I mean, we need to treat people well. They need to get a good return for their tax dollar. We need to work efficiently. But government is more than a business. If business could make money off what government does and what nonprofits do, they wouldn't be nonprofits, right? The problem is the more we treat people as customers, the inverse relationship is they take themselves only as ratepayers. And so we're starting to recognize we need to go to the next level, which is citizen participation, community engagement, and take it seriously, not just go through the motions, but recognize the community has incredible expertise and knowledge. And if we bring that together with the expertise that's in the bureaucracy, we get the best possible outcomes. We need to take it seriously. But at times we need to take the third step, which is community empowerment. Totally different than citizen participation. Citizen participation is about involving people in the government's programs or the nonprofits programs through the nonprofits or the government's processes, right? Where the professionals still have all the power, where they're setting the agenda, and we're just being consulted around that. Community empowerment is about allowing communities to focus on their own priorities through their own associations. Fundamentally different. And all three are important. All three are important. Third crisis we face is the economic crisis. Things are a little bit better here now than they were, but you know, it's pretty shaky. In Europe, things are terrible. Huge budget cuts everywhere I go. People started realizing the very time people's needs were the greatest, our agencies had the fewest resources to respond. And we started realizing they're incredible, untapped, that for too long we've just been looking at our community as a place with great needs. We've just been focusing on the half-empty part of the glass. And we've started to discover that there are incredible, underutilized assets in absolutely every community, just as Celeste pointed out. Fourth major crisis is the crisis of climate change. I don't think we're going to make it if it's just about green technology. People actually have to adopt it. And people only adopt it if they feel some sense of connection with each other in the place they share. Some sense that collectively our actions are going to make a difference. Otherwise, what difference does it make if I don't act responsibly? I'm one person on this huge planet. It's in community that we recognize our actions are going to have consequences. We recognize that together we can make change. We feel some sense of accountability, some sense of responsibility. So I want to share a story about the power of community when it comes to caring for the earth. And this story is from Auckland. the Waitakere Ranges, where two large creeks flow out of the ranges through very disadvantaged communities. They'd become totally polluted, these creeks. They'd become overgrown with invasive plants. And 15 years ago, neighbors all along the creek started mobilizing. One section of creek at a time. A school taking responsibility for one section. Neighbors taking responsibility for the next. Senior center taking responsibility for the next. And they went through and they cleaned out the garbage from those creeks. Tons and tons of garbage. Shopping carts. And then they went through and revegetated. Miles and miles of creeks. But everybody taking responsibility for their section. And the whole community got engaged. People of all ages. People from all walks of life. And now they do water quality monitoring through the schools. The kids are in charge of that. They can see the progress they're making. And they created fantastic art to celebrate this. This is on the back of a shopping center, Westfield Shopping Center. The creek was totally invisible, and it draws people down into the creek and shows the progress they're making. Every kid depicted themselves in this mural. It's absolutely beautiful. And it shows all the fish life, the sea life coming back, and the fantastic nature of New Zealand. And I was there back there just a couple months ago. This is 15 years later. And look what's happened. The native plants have grown, the bush is back. Absolutely spectacular. And this was all, the tui's back. I love the tui, all the nature. And this eel is at the end of the creek. It says, look after our streams and they'll look after you. But what a difference. 15 years, totally changed both creeks. And it was all done by neighbors. But Margaret Wheatley said, whatever the question, community is the answer. I think we're starting to wake up in our agencies and recognize that the old ways haven't worked that well. That we can't do it alone as professionals. That there is a role for community, as John said so well yesterday. When it comes to the power to care for one another, there's no substitute for personal interactions. You know, I'm on Facebook. I got 2,000 friends. But I'm under no illusion they're going to be at my funeral. Yeah. This is from Hogeveen in the Netherlands, a small village in the Netherlands. And they were concerned that their elders had to always move out of the community as they aged because there were no nursing facilities. They had an old restaurant. Volunteers came together and renovated that restaurant. They kept the old chef, but they created the most spectacular nursing home for their elders, all done by volunteers. And when I was there, this guy was cleaning up the grounds, taking care of the chickens, taking care of the rabbits, the community garden, but they involved the elders in caring for the animals. And this guy was leading a shop class for the elders to involve them in recreational activities. All volunteer, just neighbors supporting each other. They had a whole board just showing the field trips that neighbors had taken the elders on in the last couple months. Really exciting. And they told me that the elders that weren't ready for the nursing home, everyone has a buddy in the village who checks up on them every day and provides whatever support they need so they can stay in their homes, whether it's taking care of their yard, driving them to the doctor's appointment, driving them to the supermarket. Another unique power of community, and John talked about this yesterday, is the power to promote health. You know, there's studies that show that only about 15% of health outcomes can actually be attributed to healthcare professionals. That in many ways our communities can have a much bigger impact on our health, on our mental health, right? On the social determinants of health, on our personal behaviors. I was in Lewisham in England, just south of London. This guy on the right-hand side is a physician. He recognized that a high percentage of his patients, that their primary complaint was that they were depressed and lonely. So he started up a time bank. Do you know time banks? Where people join the network and say, hey, I'm willing to give an hour of my skill for an hour of skill that I need from somebody else in the network. I love it. Everybody's time is valued exactly the same. The lawyer is the same as the child care worker. Everybody's the same. So he started up a time bank. And rather than prescribe pills, he prescribed his patients join the time bank. Really cool. And he brought me to a Bring and Fix event to illustrate all the needs you could get taken care of by your neighbors. Celeste, I love that story from your neighborhood. When I was in Hamilton 2 years ago, I got this tour of the neighborhoods, and they were showing me houses that were run down, and there were problem properties in the neighborhood. So I said, what are you doing, turning them into code enforcement? No, we're helping them fix up their homes. They don't have the resources. We're neighbors. It was a great story, great story. So here, Bring and Fix event, if you pledge 2 hours of your time, you got to bring something to this event that was broken and get it fixed by your neighbors. And it showed all the things you could just get fixed by your neighbors. So this woman's fixing people's clothes, fixing somebody's blender, kids fixing people's bicycles, fixing somebody's hair, fixing somebody's back. She's excited she got her high heel fixed. Yeah. But what I really love is the way people do things together. It's all about mutual support. So here people are working together to make a fruit smoothie. And this woman offers skydiving lessons as her contribution. And it brings the whole community together for events and creates a strong sense of community. Really helped with dealing with the depression problem in this neighborhood. Another unique power of community is the power to prevent crime. This is a friend of John's and mine, Cormac Russell. His family grew up in this neighborhood in Limerick. His ancestors did. Ballinacora Weston. Tough neighborhood, really tough. Had a big gang problem. There'd been a murder in this neighborhood. Here's some of the gang members. And the government solution, without consulting the residents, was we're going to start buying up people's homes, and we're going to tear them down and build a new community. So they started buying up people's homes. They soon became boarded up. Wasn't long before they were covered with graffiti. And soon there was garbage everywhere. And with the collapse of the economy in Ireland, there's been absolutely no money to follow through on the plan. So people are worse off than ever. Half the housing boarded up. People scared to death to come out of their homes. But on Christmas Eve, the young people organized. They went around house to house Christmas caroling. Incredible bravery. But it gave everybody else the confidence to start coming out of their homes. And there was a vacant lot in that neighborhood where all the drug deals were going down, where the gang members hung out. And the young people went out and started painting out the graffiti. They cleaned up the sidewalks and the gutters. They recruited their parents and neighbors to help build planter boxes. They whitewashed the walls. And they created a mural. And they turned that problem property into what they call the Garden of Hope. And that property that kept all the neighbors indoors is now the gathering place where people come together. And people are going through now and starting to renovate some of the houses that were boarded up, living back in them again. That's the power of community. You know, too oftentimes we just rely on our police. We spent way too many resources lining up the ambulances at the bottom of the cliff when community's job is to build the fence at the top. In my country, we spent more and more and more money in so-called public safety programs. We have more and more and more people behind bars, and people aren't feeling any more safe. We've forgotten about the role of community. There is no substitute for community when it comes to crime prevention. Drives me crazy when people are complaining to government about the youth problem. Whose youth are they? And who's in a better position to care for our youth than the community? Another unique power of community is the power to respond to disaster. Both Christchurch and Kobe are sister cities of Seattle, so you don't want to be our sister. I was in both places before the earthquakes and both places afterwards. Both places, they told me the #1 lesson they learned, it's important to have those emergency supplies, but there's absolutely no substitute for knowing your neighbors. In Christchurch, when that earthquake came, a whole series of earthquakes, all the emergency crews went to the center city. Half of many of the neighborhoods were leveled. Nobody was there to respond. In fact, you couldn't get out to some of those neighborhoods because the infrastructure was toast. People were totally dependent on their neighbors. But what was really cool, this is a namesake Christchurch Cathedral. It's probably going to be demolished. There, 80% of the downtown was lost, the center city. But there were vacant lots everywhere. And the community came together and said, we need to create gathering places. We need to figure out how we can support each other, rebuild our sense of community. And so there in the center of Christchurch, where a major hotel had collapsed, they said, we're going to create a gathering place. All they had were a bunch of old construction pallets. So they built the Blue Palette Pavilion, the kind of creativity that only comes out of community. I was there opening day. It's absolutely stunning. All kinds of greenery in the palettes. And they created a stage, and they have band concerts there. They have poetry slams. Every time I go back to Christchurch, there's something happening here. It's incredible community space. Last time I was there, they were celebrating Holy Day, the Indian Festival of Color, throwing colored flour at each other. It was wild. Another vacant lot, somebody had an old washing machine. They fixed it up with speakers on the inside, and if you hook up your iPod and put in a couple quarters, you can play whatever kind of dance music you want. And there in the center of all this devastation, people are dancing. And they had another vacant lot. They had lots of vacant lots, where they painted the wall white and they made a movie screen. And you ride up on your bicycle and you hook your bicycle up to a generator, and as long as you're biking, the movie plays. It's cycle power cinema. Again, the creativity of community. They had another vacant lot where they whitewashed the wall and people could write poetry. And they do poetry readings here. Whoa. And this poem in particular really got to me. Amidst the shards of glass and twisted steel, beside the fallen brick and scattered concrete, we began to understand that there is beauty in the broken. Strangers do not live here anymore. And how through that disaster, people came to understand what was most important in their lives, each other. Prior to that earthquake, Christchurch was known as the most class-conscious place in New Zealand. The first question was always, where'd you go to school? Now the first question is, you okay? How are you doing? Same way, there's no substitute for community when it comes to creating great places. As John says, sustaining the local economy, advancing social justice. No major social change in my country has ever come top down. It's all come bottom up. Talk about the civil rights movement, the disability rights movement, the women's rights movement, the gay lesbian rights movement, the environmental movement, the anti-war movement. Every major change has come bottom up. So without strong communities, we can't make change. And our very democracy is dependent on strong communities. So what I want to talk about now is the changes that agencies need to make in order to be good partners with the community, to help restore our community. Talked about how our agencies can contribute to the breakdown of community. I want to talk about how do we reverse that. I think there's three major paradigm shifts that agencies of all kinds, non-for-profit organizations, local government, everybody needs to make. And the first one is to get out of those silos. You know, I think it's good. I don't know any other way you could organize the agencies except by silos, because you need to have that expertise. You need to have that laser-like focus on your function. But as I said, it makes it impossible to work with our communities. In the city of Seattle, we had 32 different departments of city government, each focused on their own function. We have our county government with all its departments, our state government with all its departments, our federal government with all its departments. We've got a Port of Seattle, we got a school board, we have 3 transit agencies, and we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of not-for-profit organizations, each one on their own trying to reach out and empower the community. They are being empowered to death. There aren't enough nights in the year to go to all those meetings, and it's not the way anybody experiences their community. One night people are saying, hey, come to our meeting. If you're concerned about poverty, come to our session. Come to our session if you're concerned about poor young people. Come to our session if you're concerned about old people. Come if you're concerned about our open space plan, our transportation plan, our affordable housing plan, our environmental strategy, our resilience plan. People are just being pulled in every direction. And it's not the way anybody experiences any of these things. It's in our communities, everything comes together. So if we're going to be good partners with our communities, we need to get out of the silos and think about how do we work as one local government, as one set of nonprofit organizations in a place, in a neighborhood. Start with the neighborhood rather than always starting with our function. So in Seattle, we created in 1988 a first ever Department of Neighborhoods. First time we'd organized the department the way the community was organized, by neighborhood. Our mayor was actually opposed. He said, Jim, if we form a Department of Neighborhoods, it'll let all the other departments off the hook. Now we've got one department responsible for working with the community. We're creating yet another silo. Really good observation. You can't do community development in a silo. Too oftentimes that's yet another silo. It only works if it cuts across all of the organization. So we tried to figure out how do we use our resources in the Department of Neighborhoods to help all departments work as the Department of Neighborhoods and work in more of a place-based kind of way. So we formed a system of little city halls. I don't know why all these pictures aren't showing up. There's more pictures, but just imagine them. We formed little city halls, 13 storefront offices where people could do business with their government and all the not-for-profits right in one storefront office in their business district. People love it because people have a hard time figuring out the bureaucracy of the city or the different layers of government or all the not-for-profits. They love having one place where they can get all their needs met. But the key resource we have in each of the little city halls is somebody you call a coordinator. Somebody who helps connect people with the agencies. Helps them find the resources they need, but also helps the agencies work with the community. And helps all the different community groups come together, form a network. Because we all know there's not one community out there. There's all kinds of factions. To start bringing those different associations together so they can meet each other, build the relationships, start developing a common vision, develop consensus. Our staff often refer to themselves as overt double agents. Really clear they're working for both government and the community, and their job is just to help bring the two together. We found it was a whole lot more cost effective than the old way, where each department was fending for itself, where we had 32 different departments doing outreach. But they were all doing outreach through press releases and websites, no personal contact, because they couldn't afford to do it. Now we have one set of staff that works on behalf of all the departments, so much more cost effective and so much more community friendly. In the same way, in the Kootenays, around Nelson, BC, all the nonprofit organizations have joined together to form a cooperative. Great model. Start working as one set of nonprofits and think about how can we jointly fund staff that are more place-based and working with our communities. The second major shift that agencies of all kinds need to make if they're going to be good partners with our communities is to move from always driving the agenda from the top, and sometimes we need to. You know, you don't want to plan your transportation one neighborhood at a time, right? Somebody's got to coordinate that. Growth policies, somebody's got to coordinate that. But there's so much that could be driven by the community. So pushing decisions down to the lowest possible level. Because when people own the decisions, when things are community driven, they're going to take responsibility. They're going to make it happen. So one of the ways we did that in Seattle is we created a neighborhood planning program where we actually empowered communities to hire their own planner who was accountable to the community. But we would only do it once they brought all the stakeholders together. It couldn't just be one faction of the community. It couldn't just be the ratepayers, because they often don't represent the whole community. You know? And so once they brought all the partners together, then we would give them money to hire their own planner. But we really held them accountable. We sent the plan that resulted out to the entire neighborhood, and all the neighbors could vote the plan up or down. The level of accountability we put in our community, we never put in ourselves as City Hall. And through that process, we involved 30,000 people in developing bottom-up plans. They came up with over 5,000 recommendations. We started building our department work programs and budgets around what the community said was important. Our mayor put on the ballot what the community said was important rather than his pet projects, which is always the way things have been done in the past. And because he did that, people voted to tax themselves an additional $464 million for what they'd asked for in their plans. Democracy works. People are going to vote for what they asked for. They're going to vote for their ideas. I wanted to share a story. I don't know why these pictures aren't showing up, but there's a great picture here. I'll describe it to you. This is our, I want to talk not just about government, because I think too often times when we talk about agencies and how agencies change, we're just thinking about government. And I think we also need to think about the not-for-profits that have become the surrogate for community. That too often times in government, we're just working with the not-for-profits and we think we're working with the community. And for the most part, not-for-profits weren't elected. They're less accountable to the community than government is. They're easy to work with. They're working the same hours. They speak the same language. They're pretty pliable because they're being funded by government. They provide valuable services, but their service is not to be the community. right? So we need to move beyond that. So I want to share a story of a nonprofit in Seattle and how they changed the way they did their work. The nonprofit is Senior Services of King County. King County is the next layer of government up from the city of Seattle. So it's where all our suburban cities are, small towns all over a huge geographic area. And Senior Services manages all the senior centers in King County. They also manage all the services like Meals on Wheels and that kind of thing. Denise Klein is the head of Senior Services, and she came to me and said, Jim, we got a terrible problem. Our population is quickly aging, the needs are growing quickly, but our resources are declining. Every year we're having larger and larger and larger budget cuts. We've got to figure out a new way of doing our work. So we organized a process we call Aging Your Way. And we organized gatherings all over King County in small towns and in urban neighborhoods, had 15 gatherings, invited boomers and older people to come. And they sat around tables, and Denise started off with this great exercise. She asked people, close your eyes and think about when you are first old. It really shook up people like me who've never wanted to think about being old. You know, what's it like? What kind of support do you need? How are you connecting with your community? How are you fitting into your neighborhood? So here people are reflecting on that question. I love this next woman's expression. She's not quite sure she wants to go there. Yeah. And this guy's having fun with it. And then when people were in that frame of mind, I asked them to have a discussion around their tables about what would a senior-friendly community look like? What would your neighborhood or your town need to be like in order to allow you to age in the way you would like? And then I gave everybody 20 minutes to collectively draw their vision of a senior-friendly community. So here people are drawing their vision. And then each table got a minute to present their vision back to the group as a whole. Don't look good. No. Yeah, the visions were actually much more impressive than this. I don't know what happened. Anyhow, so they came up with fantastic visions for their community. And and then I had a graphic artist who took all those visions and created a composite vision for each neighborhood or each town. And they had a pretty easy job because the themes were very similar from one table to the next. And here's what we heard. The first thing we heard is we have spent a whole lifetime gaining skills and knowledge and building relationships. And now we're just valued for our needs. We're just valued as clients. We want the opportunity to contribute. Second thing we heard, right now in senior services, all we see is a bunch of old people. It is so boring. We want to interact with young people, but they're in a different silo. Third thing we heard, we spent a whole lifetime screwing up the environment. We want to give back. We want to live in a place that's green, that's sustainable. Fourth thing we heard, right now, every stage of our life, we have to move to a different place. We want to age around the people we know and love. We want to age in the places with which we are familiar. So we want universal design. We want walkable neighborhoods. We want good access to services. We want good transportation. Not one of these priorities was being addressed by senior services. Shows the importance of, instead of always delivering our programs, always delivering our services, stepping back and finding out what's important to the people. We said there aren't any resources to implement any of this, so you're going to have to take responsibility if you want some of these things to happen. So groups came together to organize. Here's some of the actions that came out of the gatherings. One group came together and organized a neighborhood walking map. In West Seattle, they organized a senior dating service. That was their priority. 3 different groups organized around senior co-housing projects. We had one gathering for the gay lesbian community. They came up with a whole series of projects. 3 virtual retirement villages where neighbors are helping elders stay in their homes. Just about every group wanted resources for lifelong learning. We realized that there were a lot of them. There was just no way to access them. So volunteers came together to create a website showing all the opportunities. So in another neighborhood, Pepe's Woods, seniors and young people worked together to clean up the woods to create a trail system.
Organized 4 time banks all over King County that came out of this process, where young people and elders are supporting each other, where young people are helping elders maintain their yards, drive them to doctor's appointments, teach them how to use a computer. Older people teaching young people a craft, teaching them a trade, making them a great meal. And in my neighborhood, they said the strength of our communities are many different cultures. So volunteers organized a world dance party. God, we had the best time. People showed up from 12 different cultures and taught each other their dance. People were there from absolutely every generation, every different culture. And then we organized a summit. We said, and we had 350 people show up from all these different gatherings. And we met with the elected officials. We met with the funders. And we said, here's our vision. Here's what we're doing to carry out our vision. And here's what we need from you. There's some things we can't do as a community. We need your help in developing better transportation options. We need your help in creating policies to create more walkable neighborhoods. And they were incredibly responsive because there were 350 people in the room with a shared vision, and because the community was putting their own resources into helping to carry out that vision. Really powerful when agencies get out of the silos and start focusing on whole communities and their strengths. The next and third major paradigm shift we need to make is, instead of always focusing on the needs of the community, and we often say that professionals need needs, right? It's a good thing there are needs in the community, or a lot of us would be out of work, right? And it's a good thing we have professionals, because there's some things communities don't do so well. But often in our desire to help communities, the first thing we do is do a needs assessment to figure out what are all the problems, how can we be the most helpful? It's a very legitimate exercise. The problem is we often stop there and we forget about this map of the same place, which are all the strengths of the community. And I would argue that this is the basis for partnerships. Because with the other map, where the community is bringing nothing but needs to the table, all the power is with the professionals. There's really no value in partnering with the community because they aren't bringing anything to the table, but a lot of gripes, right? So this is the basis for partnerships. So in Seattle, we tried to move in that direction of partnerships by creating a program we call the Neighborhood Matching Fund. The program was designed to help support communities and projects that had always been a priority for the community but hadn't been a priority for City Hall. And we said, how about we'll make this fund available to any group of neighbors. So this isn't for the not-for-profit organizations. This is not for staffed organizations. We have millions of dollars we put out the door for contracts for those very important services. This is just for neighbors. Unincorporated neighbors, just neighbors who want to come together to do a project. How about if we just fund one-time projects because we want to build capacity rather than creating more dependence? We aren't going to fund staff, we aren't going to fund operating costs. And said, how about if all the funding decisions are made by the neighborhood leaders themselves? Took this idea to our city council, very controversial. Why should we put any money into projects that aren't our priority? We don't have enough money for everything that is. Finally, at a vote of 5-4, not exactly a mandate, they approved $150,000 for the first year, and with that money we supported 22 community self-help projects. They were so popular that the next year our council voted unanimously to increase the fund to $1.5 million. And they subsequently increased it to $4.5 million. So we support about 400 to 500 community self-help projects every year. Over the past 20 years there have been over 5,000 community self-help projects. There's evidence of them in absolutely every neighborhood, greatly contributing to the quality of life, reinforcing what's special about that place. The city's $60 million investment over the years has leveraged $85 million in community resources, largely volunteer labor, that under the old model, where people were looking to government to do everything, never would have been tapped. But the best benefit is it's newly involved tens of thousands of people in community life because we've finally given people a way to get involved other than going to meetings. And I know people in Canada are very different than people in Seattle, but in Seattle not everybody likes to go to meetings. And usually that's the only option we give people. I tell you, projects is so much more effective than meetings if you want to build community. Because with projects, unlike with meetings, there's always a result. With projects, unlike with meetings, it's a short-term commitment. It's not a life sentence, right? And in the process, people build relationships. And there's a role for everybody in projects, for young people, for elders, for people with disabilities, construction workers, architects, artists, people who never come to the meetings. And in the process, they build relationships. And once people build relationships, then they're more likely to come to some meetings, because you need a few meetings as well. But we always lead with the meetings and wonder why the same people keep showing up. It's really dumb. We're often trying to engage community before we have built community. And we need to recognize that that is should be a basic function of government, of not-for-profit organizations, is help make it easier for people to come together to build those relationships. Because we're never going to engage people in our government until we've started engaging them with each other. So I want to share, and through that program, just some examples of the kind of projects. Every one of our playgrounds in Seattle, both in our parks and our schools, has been designed and built by neighbors. Used to be every one of our playgrounds looked exactly the same. I think our Parks Department got a really good deal, right? That fiberglass playground you see in every park. Now each one reflects what's special about that neighborhood, about that community. This is in Carkeek Park, where the neighbors worked for 20 years to clean up the creek and make it better salmon habitat. They were finally successful after 20 years of work to get the salmon to come back to their neighborhood. They said, now we got the salmon back, we need kids back in our park. We need a playground. They had the design meeting. One of the kids raised his hand and said, I want a salmon playground. The adults are all scratching their heads because nobody had ever seen a salmon playground before. But a local artist said, I've got an idea. And he built a 19-foot-long salmon that's so big you slide it in the mouth and you come out the tail. All kinds of parks have been designed and built by neighbors. This is a park to commemorate Dr. Martin Luther King. All designed and built by neighbors. All kinds of environmental projects. This is one capturing the water off the side of downtown buildings in Seattle to irrigate our community gardens. It's like the hand of Michelangelo reaching out, capturing water, 10-foot high, beckoning cistern. It's a project that never would have come out of our city government because it took 7 departments to permit it. The kind of ingenuity that only comes out of community. Food security programs. I wish I could show you this beautiful community garden, but it didn't show up. But we now have 95 organic community gardens in Seattle, all built by neighbors, 7,000 urban gardeners. Collectively, they donate 15 tons of organic produce to our food banks every year. 20 most recent gardens are built by immigrants and refugees, able to grow food indigenous to their culture, sell the produce as a way to make some income, and make cross-cultural connections. Renovated facilities like this beautiful log cabin that was rotting away in West Seattle, and they fix it up to become this wonderful historical museum. Cultural centers. We don't just fund neighborhood groups, we also fund communities of color, because oftentimes immigrant and refugee communities identify with their cultural group before they identify with the neighborhood. This is our Eritrean community. They were concerned they're losing their kids to the streets, getting involved in gangs. We paid for all the materials, they did all the volunteer work, they built their own cultural center, bringing their kids back into their culture, back into their community. It's been incredibly successful. Business district revitalization. This, as you can see, is a set of storefronts that was all boarded up. And in my business district, we lost all our stores. Same thing is happening to Main Street everywhere. We kept trying to get businesses. We did all kinds of projects to get businesses to come in. Finally, one block, we couldn't get any businesses to come in. We said, if we can't get real businesses, let's pretend. So what kind of business would you like? Somebody said, I want an ice cream store. Somebody else said, I want a hat shop. I want a dance studio. I want a bookstore. So we painted all the boarded up storefronts to make it look like there were businesses inside. People got excited. Cars were stopping. People wanted to get out and shop. Within a year, we had to take down every mural because real businesses wanted to get in on the action. You go to Columbia City today, you won't see one empty storefront. They're building new mixed-use development to keep up with demand. And everything that happened there built on the community's resources, using the community's ideas. You know, a nonprofit bike store that involves kids in repairing bikes, and every kid earns his or her own bicycle. A cooperative art gallery. All kinds of cool projects. Youth development. This is from our Soder neighborhood, south of downtown Seattle, warehouse industrial area. The backs of the warehouses covered with graffiti. Mike Perringer, a local factory worker, was embarrassed about this image of his neighborhood. He had a great idea. He says, why don't we see the backs of the warehouses as potential canvases for murals? He called it the Urban Art Corridor. But Mike had an even better idea. He worked with our court system, and he asked the judges, could you offer the kids who get busted for graffiti an alternative sentence where they could come and help us to create the murals? Wasn't an easy decision for the kids, like a job. You had to show up at work on time, you had to dress appropriately, you got life skills training, mentored by professional artists, but young people created all the murals. And we found that as long as the kids were involved in the program, not one of them reoffended. The problem in Seattle is you can only paint outdoor murals 3 months a year. So Mike came up with another great idea and got a local warehouse to donate their space, and in there they create murals on 4x8 sheets of plywood. They put those around construction sites to beautify the construction sites. The developers pay for the murals, and it keeps the program sustainable over time. So now more than 1,500 murals have been created through this program, and more than 5,000 young people participated. And you don't have to get busted to get into the program. We didn't want to create negative incentives, right? All kinds of public art. This was an area where they had a huge problem of illegal drug use and dumping underneath the bridge, which was good for nothing except holding up the bridge. So there's all kinds of problems under there. Any other neighborhood, they would have put up CCTV cameras. They would have put up a fence to keep people out. This neighborhood had a different idea. They said, why don't we bring legitimate activity in? Let's bring in a piece of public art to attract activity. So this is what they installed, a gigantic troll. And that troll is so big, that's a real VW. This is like the second year of our matching fund. It was still very controversial. When I told the mayor we're going to use public funds to build a troll under the bridge, I started looking for another job, right? But it's been incredibly successful. You know, it just brings people now from absolutely all over the world and totally revitalized the business district, and there's never any problems with public safety. Not a solution that would have come out of our police department, right? Huge public safety problem under the bridge. Let's bring in a troll. I don't think so. But so much more effective. So I talked about how we need to, if we're going to work with communities, we really need to focus on the community strengths. And the key strength, as John said yesterday, as Celeste said, is that recognizing that absolutely everybody in our community has gifts to give. Absolutely everybody. Everybody without exception has gifts to give to our community. And I like to think of them as 3 kinds of gifts. One are gifts of the head, that person's knowledge. Gifts of the heart, that person's passions. Gifts of the hands, that person's skills. Absolutely everybody's got these. But the problem in our society is that we have labeled most people in our community not by their gifts, but by what they are missing. We use terms like homeless. When you think about a homeless person, you think about a lot of gifts. No, you think about what they're missing, a home. Our friend in Cincinnati, Ohio, has a church called New Prospect Baptist Church. Members of his congregation have a soup kitchen in the basement for homeless men. Finally, somebody got the idea and says, why don't we interview these men, find out what their gifts are? Turns out a whole bunch of these men like to cook. They said, would you like to help cook the meals in the soup kitchen? They were overjoyed. Nobody had ever thought to ask them that before. And after a while, it was kind of hard to tell who were the providers and who were the clients, because it wasn't about services anymore. It was about community. To me, that's the definition of community. Everybody sharing their gifts with each other to meet each other's needs. But we've buried people's gifts under those labels. Unemployed, poor person, non-English speaking. We've defined new immigrants and refugees by the one language they don't know. Single parent. Who's got better time management skills than a single parent? Just ask Celeste, right? Or ask Barack Obama. Addict, offender, disabled. How many people in this room have no disability? I see some eyeglasses. My disability is my memory. It gets worse every year. But when I'm applying for a job, I don't say I'm disabled. Please hire me. I try to think of some gifts I have. And yet there's a growing section of our population that we think of only in terms of their disability. And we miss out on all their abilities. And we just focus on what people are missing. They become clients in a service system. We focus on people's gifts. They become citizens in our community, because that's the basis of community. People sharing their gifts with each other. Recognizing everybody has needs. I'm not discounting people have needs. Everybody in this room has some needs. Everybody in this room requires some services. But I think most people in this room would be identified primarily by your gifts And most people outside this room would be identified primarily by what they're missing. And then we wonder why all those individuals aren't active in our communities, because we have defined them out of community. We have defined them as clients rather than as citizens. So we need to lift off those labels and focus on everybody's gifts. At-risk youth drives me crazy. You know, there's truth in every one of these labels. Young people are at risk. We are all at risk. Some of us older people are even more at risk. Right? There's some truth to it. But if you lift off that label, who's got more energy than young people? Who's got more creativity than young people? Who's got more at stake in the future of our community than young people? Who understands technology better than young people? Who are the experts on young people more than young people? As John said, we sit around and talk about the youth problem. We don't have a youth problem. Our problem is we aren't engaged in the gifts of young people. An old person. So I just want to share a story, again, about a not-for-profit and about how they changed the way they did their work. This is in our High Point neighborhood, social housing community in Seattle, a couple thousand residents. And they are the most labeled people you can imagine. We got every label in this community. We got homeless people. We got poor people. We have lots of non-English speaking people. We have lots of at-risk youth. We got lots of old people. Every label you can imagine is in this community. And there was a nonprofit organization called Neighborhood House. They got a grant, and the grant was to create a healthy community. So they put up the posters inviting people to come to their gathering about creating a healthy community. Nobody showed up. So they did the worst thing in the world. They started paying people to come to their meetings, right? And they had a paid advisor group, and they sat down with them and said, what would create a healthy community? They came up with a whole list of things that could create a healthier community. But every one of those things was something for a professional to do, because that's how everything gets done in High Point. They had no extra resources to implement any of this. They asked me to come in. I said, could you get your neighbors involved? Could you get your friends involved? They said, you know, nutrition and exercise aren't our biggest priority. I said, what's your biggest priority? They said, we just want to create an awesome community. I said, really? Would people come out to a gathering about how to create an awesome community? They said, if we had good food. I said, I just have a little bit of budget. I could pay for the ingredients. Could you make the food? People were so proud to bring their dishes from all over the world and share their culture with each other. Then they said if we had entertainment, people would come. I said, what kind of entertainment could you provide? There was a senior who said, I belong to a line dance group. And they showed up, and some of them even had walkers. But the music was so contagious, young people jumped up and said, could we do this with you every month? They said if we had raffle prizes, people would come. I said, what could you raffle? Somebody said, I make a great apple pie. Somebody said, I do knitting. I'll create a stocking cap. Somebody else said, I love to garden. I'll pledge a couple hours of gardening. We had so many raffle prizes, we're raffling for a half hour. We had a huge turnout. Had a couple hundred people show up because they all felt some role in this event. And then I had them do some brainstorming about what would create an awesome community. And then we did open space and said, look, none of these things is going to happen unless you take responsibility, get people to join you. So one at a time, people stood up and advocated their idea. This woman said, I just moved here from China. I'd like to start up a tea house as a way to create a gathering place, a way for neighbors to connect with each other. There were some Somali elders in the corner who said, we don't drink tea, we drink coffee. She said, okay, we'll have a tea and coffee house. So they came together to start planning that. This guy said, I like to exercise, but I'm a terrible organizer. If people will help me organize the classes, I'd be happy to lead them. This young woman said, I love to play soccer, but because of my religion, I can't play outdoor soccer. I want to start up an indoor soccer league. This woman said, this is an incredible multicultural feast we made tonight. That's our gift. I'd like to start up a multicultural catering company as a way to make some income, but also share our culture with the larger community. And this guy, Solomon, he was the most poised of all. He 11-year-old boy. He stood up there and says, all my friends in all the other neighborhoods, they have parks, playgrounds. I want a swing set. And he tugged at everybody's heartstrings, right? And there were some elders in the corner who said, we do regular walks around the neighborhood for exercise. We get tired. How about if we create a park with a bench and a swing set? They came together 6 months later to build that park. Oh boy. Here's the bench. The housing authority said, you can't do a swing set because of health and safety. They said, well, Solomon's absolutely counting on the swing set. We got to build it. So here it is, and here's Solomon. Well, Solomon's really happy. Just imagine. Now, not every one of those projects happened, but a bunch of others did. They started up a community garden. They started up a community orchard. They started up a craft group where they're teaching each other crafts. And now they're making sweaters for Nicholsville, a homeless encampment, watching out for people who are worse off than they are. And if you think about it, every one of these projects improved the health of the residents. But we never would have gotten there if we just pushed the health agenda. It's so important to step back and let the community set their own agenda. Then they take ownership. The more we push it, the more it's ours. So I've shared a lot of stories from Seattle, but what I want to emphasize is because of the crisis, because of the opportunities, this is happening absolutely everywhere in the world. It's an incredibly exciting time. It's an incredibly exciting time. It's what gives me hope. That this isn't just happening in this corner of the world, it's happening absolutely everywhere. So oh my God, what's happening now? Help, I need a young person. Yeah. So in Brazil, they're doing participatory budgeting. You know, building budgets, the city budget from the bottom up, involving the whole community in developing the city's budget, recognizing it's going to be so much stronger if they make the democracy work. In India, they have village assemblies in every village. In many ways, India and Brazil are far ahead of the rest of us in terms of doing democracy. In the United Kingdom, they said because we don't have any resources, we're going to invest in community. Because that's where the resources are. So they trained 5,000 community organizers. They created a matching fund based on Seattle's of 120 million pounds across the country. I got to do a couple presentations at 10 Downing Street. I said, this is fantastic. You're recognizing the role of community. But you know, there's also a role for government. And you can't just get the community to do what government used to do. They were kind of trying to get community to step in and do the jobs of civil servants. There's a role for both. There's some things that professionals do best, some things communities do best. In New Zealand, they call the movement community-led development. It's fantastic. They're building largely on Maori culture, Maori concepts. And this movement is taking root all over New Zealand. Bottom-up planning, all kinds of matching fund projects. There's a group called Inspiring Communities that's doing fantastic work in cities all over New Zealand to lead the movement. In Australia, where I just was, I got to speak at a Power of the People conference. It was sponsored by the Municipal Association of Victoria, all the local governments. How refreshing to have local government think that people might have something to do with government. God. You know, we're just always focused on the physical infrastructure. Who's taking care of the democratic infrastructure? Who's taking care of the community infrastructure? Thank you for fixing that. Oh, I love this in Palmerston North. This is in New Zealand. They give everybody a placemaking kit, all the neighborhood leaders, so they can create their own places. And they give them guidelines, they give them chalk, they give them all kinds of tools. But the best tool is this one. It's a get out of jail free card. And it says, if you inadvertently contravene city regulations in your effort to make the neighborhood a better place, hand this card to the city planner. And his phone number and email are on there. And it's issued by the local government. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Yay for New Zealand. Singapore, young people are leading the way and saying we want to bring back the kampong, that sense of village in this high rises. And they're leading the movement to create a 21st century kampong movement. In Taiwan, I got to speak at the graduation of hundreds of young people who are graduating as planners. Volunteers leading projects in their neighborhoods. In Japan, out of the earthquake in Kobe came a huge community building movement. I was going backwards. And here in Canada, just amazing work happening all over Canada. You're going to see some fantastic examples of that right here in Hamilton. But lots of bottom-up planning, lots of matching fund programs happening across the country, interdepartmental teams, neighborhood summits, block party toolkit and Airdries, where they said, you know, instead of making it as hard as possible for people doing a street party, we're going to make it really easy. Just call us up. We'll bring out the barricades. We'll even bring out the barbecue. You got to bring your own food and cook it. But we're going to make it easy for you because we think it's important to have strong communities. That's the key to health. It's the key to safety. It's the key to resilience. So how can community workers help? I've talked about these huge global changes we need to make as agencies. Absolutely critical. We need to push for those changes, but don't wait for the change. There's a lot we can do as individuals. So here's some of the keys. The first step we need to take as individuals in making the change is the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm. Before we start trying to help, recognize the harm we inadvertently do to the very communities we're trying to help. First one is don't distract the community from its own priorities. We're always out there setting the agenda. We're always out there trying to consult with the community around what we think is important, what we think they should care about. Leaves very little time or space for the community to focus on their own priorities. Don't force the community into agency silos. Don't take people's time without showing results. I tell you, we complain about the usual suspects. We have created them. We've worn everybody else down. I know in Seattle we always had this famous Seattle process. We have to do lots of consultation because we need to look like a democracy. But we haven't always thought ahead how we're going to use what we hear. And even if we use what we hear, we often don't feed back to communities. Here's what we did as a result of what we heard from you. And if people don't see a connection between their engagement and results, they learn it doesn't pay to be involved. We don't take people's time seriously enough. We're very conscious about how we spend our time as professionals, but we think of the community's time as free time. And it's very valuable time to the people who are participating. Time they could be spending with family. Time they could be spending earning an income. Time they could be spending having fun. So we need to make it worth their while. Don't take people's time without showing results. Don't think of the community solely as people in places with needs. Don't speak for the community. Don't do for people what they can do for themselves. That's the iron rule of community organizing. The hardest rule for any of us to learn, because we're all doing this work because we care deeply about our communities. But often in our desire to help communities, we're taking away their own agency. Don't make the community dependent on you, funding, or other external resources. No one of us is going to be around forever. And certainly our programs won't. You know, every administration comes up with new initiatives. And our initiatives are often dependent on grants, which are one time. So we always need to think, is the community going to be better off or worse off because we were here? Have we built more capacity, or have we created more dependence? And then don't use liability, safety, or other red tape as an automatic excuse to say no to communities. It's the biggest problem I see everywhere. Communities want to do projects and they get to the bureaucracy and they're told all the reasons why it can't happen. All legitimate reasons, but instead of saying, we're going to work through this and figure out how to say yes, we automatically say no. And then finally, support communities to take the lead, to get out of your cubicle and into the neighborhood. You can't do community work behind a computer. It's face to face. Help the community discover its resources and power. Share tools that enable the community to take the lead. Assist community associations to network with one another so they can work as one community. Help people find ways to share their gifts with one another. Pay attention to segments of the community that are being excluded and find ways to engage them. We're always complaining about the usual suspects. Usually the only people we're dealing with are the people who are organized to deal with us. And we forget that everybody's already organized. They just don't belong to the neighborhood association. They belong to faith-based groups. They belong to youth groups. They belong to mutual assistance associations. If we really want to get everybody engaged, we need to go out and reach them where they're at, rather than always waiting for people to come to us. Raise objections when you encounter discrimination. Ask questions to get people thinking about root causes, instead of just putting Band-Aids on. Develop leaders, share stories of community success, and practice what you preach by being active in your own community. We often talk about community like it's good for somebody else. And we're all community members, or should be. So I just want to share a couple quick stories about professionals making change. This is in the Forstead neighborhood of Dayventure and other ones. Very poor neighborhood, lots of social issues. The local government did a pretty good job in repairing the infrastructure, but the social issues continued. This woman, second from the left, Herlinda, was the new neighborhood manager. She came in and met with the residents and said, here's what I'm going to do to support you, but here's what you need to do. They were so angry because they were always used to having their neighborhood manager do everything they asked. So they complained to their alderman and said, we want her fired. Fortunately, the alderman backed her up. And she and the other neighborhood leaders took me on a tour of the projects that they've accomplished over the last few years, and how they respected each other, and how the residents were so proud of what they had accomplished. So the residents had created their own playground, and they were supervising the playground. They created this fantastic mural celebrating the Eagles, which is their football club that's located in the neighborhood. Everybody's proud of the Eagles. The 17 people organized themselves in a group they called the Crazy Hanks. And they pick up the garbage around the neighborhood and keep the neighborhood looking clean as volunteers. They cleaned up the greenways and revegetated with native plants. They had an old overgrown area along the railway tracks, and they created a dog park. It really helps connect the neighbors. There was a dilapidated building in the middle of the business district, and they created their own park, all built by neighbors. Then they took the pavers in front of people's homes and they turned them up on end in order to create little garden beds in front of every house. And now 185 households have done so. Just really changes the image of the place. She painted hers in the colors of the Deventer Eagles because they're so proud of their football team. And here I am. I got to go to the football game. And oh, it was crazy. People were so excited. This is my friend Joop Hoffman. He's a crazy Eagles fan, but he's also a fantastic organizer. And here we are in the Eagle Stadium, and they got the Eagle Stadium turned back to the community during the weekdays because the Eagle Stadium's only used at night. And in there, neighbors are mentoring the youth, young people. Young people are so excited to come into the Eagle Stadium and do their homework because it's their heroes. It's a great, great use of space. And Joop, he's an amazing guy. He's so well connected all across the Netherlands, and he works with local government. He offers what he calls guerrilla management training. And he teaches civil servants how to be guerrillas and how to always question, why are we doing things the way we're doing them? How can we start saying yes to community? How can we start becoming better community partners? In Limburg, he brought a whole group of civil servants to Seattle for a master class. We did a master class. A couple firefighters showed up. I said, boy, what are we going to do with these firefighters? What's going to be their role in community? And their big complaint was, we keep having these workshops around fire safety and nobody ever shows up. What do we do? I said, why don't you just go out to the community and find out what they care about? So this woman on the right, firefighter, she couldn't get any support from her chief, so she did it in her own time and went around and walked the neighborhood, finding out what people cared about. Turns out a whole lot of people wanted to have community kitchens. She recognized every fire station had a kitchen. So they opened up their fire stations for community kitchens. And now members of the neighborhood and the firefighters are cooking and eating together. And as they cook and eat, they talk about fire safety. So powerful to start with the community's agenda. They're going to get to your agenda eventually, but you start with the community. So she invited me to Limburg, and there was a huge gathering. The fire chief welcomed me. He even brought the fire engine. He knew I'd love to go for a ride. But now they're taking this approach. They've totally changed the way they're doing their work, and it's because there was one firefighter who stepped out and just took the initiative. And I was just in Surrey, British Columbia. Tough neighborhood, Newton neighborhood. A lot of crime, very multicultural community. Right in the middle of the neighborhood, right in the center, right next to a big wave pool, there was a woods. It was a scary place, very dark. A lot of homeless people, a lot of crime happening out of there, a lot of drug dealing. The police department, the RCMP, did CPTED. Do you know CPTED? Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. They said we need to improve the sight lines. We should chop down all the trees. And the neighbors said, well, that's a real treasure we've got. Let's figure out how to use these trees. So they put up a sign saying, true community safety is only possible when neighbors know each other. And they gave these trees a name. They call it the Grove. And they put up a sign, welcome to the Grove, with curtains. I love this sign. This is the official sign. Look left for buses, but they added one. Look inside for happiness, to draw people in. And they put frames around all the trees, and artists come, and they put their art in the frames, really thinking about how they could take advantage of these trees. And on opening day, they had welcome signs up in all the different languages of the community. They wanted to get lighting in at night. They said, if we have lighting, it's going to be less scary. They went to the city and said, we can't do lighting. It's going to cost $10,000. But there was one person in the city who realized, hey, how about if we just put up Christmas lights? It'll cost $500. So that's what they did, and it really works. Kids love it, having a natural place to play. Somebody created a chessboard on the stump of the old tree. They created a tightrope going between. They really figured out how to use these trees. It's great. They have a little village in the trees. All kinds of activities organized by the neighbors. Seed bombing workshops. They have ballers to keep cars from coming through, and they're always dressing them up. They have a great time with those. They use chalk to paint the tree. All kinds of concerts now are happening. This has become the community gathering place. I love this one. They have a free piano. They create the poet tree. They have words, and you can rearrange them and create poems. And people started writing poems and putting them in the frames. And then they created a poetry group called the Cedar Bark Poets Gathering. And I met this woman, formerly homeless woman, who's the leader of the collective. And she's proudly displaying 3 volumes of poetry that have come out of the Grove. And they have all kinds of events. Here they're having the blessing ceremony with the smudge. And they celebrate Remembrance Day. They celebrate all the holidays there, even Groundhog Day. And I love this sign. Again, the official sign. No dumping, no loitering, clothes dusted on. Park suggestions. Don't be mean. Smile at others. Say hello. God, these guys are fun. And look at how it creates community. It creates this fantastic gathering place. And these guys got the award from the city of Surrey. They got the beautification award from the city. But what I loved was they gave it back to all the neighbors. They gave it to the musicians who helped program that space. They gave it to the young people who loved that space, and to the neighbors who helped care for that space. But what was really cool, they gave it also to the police. And the best of all, the Parks Department that gave the award, they gave it back to the Parks Department because they were true partners. The woman on the right-hand side is the beautification coordinator, the woman who figured out, how do we say yes? How do we get lighting in this park? And the guy on the left, he's the head of the aquatic center, of the wave pool. And he started thinking about, my job isn't just to take care of this pool, it's about supporting our community. So he made his facilities available to provide all kinds of support to this group. And now he's really connected with the larger community. And so many more people come to the wave pool because people feel safe. Really powerful when we get out of our boxes. So the final thing I want to say is it's really difficult to do this work. I try to make it sound exciting because it is, but it's also tough. One of the toughest things I know that we face is just we're always asked, what are the results? How do we measure our success? Drives me crazy. It's back to that business model, right? And if we're doing community development work right, what do we measure? Because if we do it right, it affects everything. All kinds of studies have been done showing that, right? And what do we take credit for? You know, we built this fantastic community garden and the crime rate's dropping is because we built the garden. So I think we spend way too much time and way too many resources measuring stuff that we could actually be using to support communities. I grew up in Iowa, so I love the old Iowa farm proverb. You don't make the hog fatter by weighing it. And I love the Einstein quote. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And yet we're often just counting stuff because we have to have some measure of something. It's really not what's important. They really figured it out in St. Kilda in Australia. They said, you know, the only thing that really matters is whether people are happy. Think about it. What else is important? So they train volunteers how to be smile spies. And they walk down the street and they capture each other's eyes and they see what percentage of people smile back. And then they have a formula they've worked out. They calculate how many smiles per hour are in each neighborhood. And then they post traffic signs to show how many smiles are in that neighborhood. And it's the only indicator I've seen that's actually changing conditions because no neighborhood wants to be seen as unfriendly. So the numbers keep going up. These guys are up to 10. This guy's really happy. He's up to 14. So I just want to conclude by thanking you all for everything you do to put smiles on the face of people in your community. But I think there's so much more we could do. We really need to ramp it up. We need to take it to the next level. There is too much at stake. And now is our time. You know, our friend Cormac Russell says, you know, you shouldn't waste a good crisis. And we got lots of crises right now. And we aren't going to get a lot more opportunities. We need to take advantage of this. We can't just muck around the edges. We really need to go full bore, make huge shifts in the way we do our work, both in nonprofits and in local government. And communities also need to change, right? I'm going to be talking more about that in the workshop. But for right now, let's focus on how do we become really good partners? How do we put more smiles on the faces of people here? How can we best contribute to this incredible global community building movement that's happening all around the world? My hat off to Tamarack for taking the initiative on this and for your vision about trying to create places all over Canada that are good partners with our neighborhood. So thanks so much. Thanks for what you all do. Appreciate it.